inaugural manufacturing Indaba in partnership with Masisizane Fund and Old Mutual. I want to welcome members of the media. I want to welcome also manufacturing Indaba participants today. And I also want to welcome our distinguished guests. I'm sure it's going to be a very innovative, and it's also informative session, and it's going to be a session that's actually going to assist in actually better understanding the sector. My name is Dokang Sriti. I'm the CEO of Masisizane. What Masisizane does, Masisizane was initially established in 2007 as on the back of the unclaimed share scheme from Old Mutual. The intention of Masisizane is to provide funding to Black entrepreneurs. In effect, is to provide transformation funding to Black entrepreneurs in a number of different sectors. We've had a focus on the agribusiness sector, the supply chain sectors, and also franchising sectors, including the manufacturing sector that we're discussing today. From Masisizane perspective and an Old Mutual perspective, we are of the view that the manufacturing sector is an important sector that needs to be supported. I think this is despite the challenges that it's faced in the past couple of years. And also, we are of the view that perhaps now is an opportunity to relook at the sector, look at it differently, and find more innovative ways of actually providing funding to the sector. And as part of our efforts at actually trying to support the sector, this is our initial efforts at relooking at the sector, looking at opportunities that are in the sector. And you'll see in the panelists that are actually going to come and give a presentation, they will give presentations on opportunities within the sector themselves. I think innovation, which is actually taking place, and perhaps some of the constraints within the sector. So we've got a diverse panel of people who are coming from both DFIs, and some of them are entrepreneurs within the sector itself, who are going to share their experiences. I think certainly the manufacturing sector is not a sector that has not experienced its challenges, and this obviously is not a new thing. It has happened over a number of years with there has been deindustrialization that's actually taking place in the SA economy. And it hasn't just happened in South Africa; it has happened in other countries throughout the world. And I think, unfortunately, COVID hasn't helped the actual sector itself, together with the power cuts that we've had. I mean, from a sector performance perspective, it has reduced by 2.1% year on year when you compare Feb 2021 and the prior year. And if, for example, you look at performance of the individual sectors within the manufacturing sectors, those have also declined, but there have been stellar areas or stellar performance within the sector. For example, the vehicle manufacturing and accessory sector, that's performed very well, and it's also supported the entire manufacturing sector. And that is an area that has been supported clearly by the initiatives which have been put in place by government. And it's also an area that we also see as a key opportunity where we could assist in provide funding, specifically in transformation initiatives. For example, I think one of the things that we will be looking at is the creation of is to support the government's view of transformation by looking at the vehicle retail parks near townships, which is a key transformation initiative that the sector has, the vehicle sector has signed up to, and we think it's an opportunity to actually ensure that there's transformation, also to actually grow the sector within an area that's actually currently growing. So I want to thank you for taking part in this particular webinar, which is the first of its kind. And we also want to acknowledge Liz Hart, who's the MD of the manufacturing Indaba. who's obviously a key partner in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy the panelists as they give their views on the sector and what interventions are actually required in the sector. Thank you.
Good morning to you all, and thank you for joining us at this year's Manufacturing Indaba Insights webinar in partnership with Old Mutual and the Masisizane Fund. My name is Kanya Okumu. I am the head of strategic partnerships in Old Mutual's corporate division. Today, I am joined by our esteemed panelists, where we'll be talking about redesigning the landscape, exploring post-pandemic opportunities for manufacturing. You can see the panelists around me on the screen this morning. I'll just ask each of them in turn to briefly introduce themselves. Mark, may I start with you?
Good morning all. My name is Mark Goliath and I'm representing the Industrial Development Corporation. I currently head up the Textiles and Wood Strategic Business Unit within the Industrial Development Corporation, and we fully involved in the manufacturing within the sectors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Bongiwe, may I come to you?
Sure. Morning, everybody. My name is Bongiwe Jantziko. I am representing SM Tax Digital Accounting, but more specifically in my capacity as Chief Executive of the SM Tax Transire Business Accelerator, which happens, Kanya, to be empowered by the Masisizane Fund. We obviously are sector agnostic and we work with various sectors as a digital accounting firm and a business accelerator, but very excited to share my insights around manufacturing in particular.
Thank you, Bongiwe. Sipho?
Morning, everyone. My name is Sipho Ngai from the Old Mutual Masisizane Fund. I'm the Business Development Manager. We are a DFI that funds small businesses, and one of our sectors of focus is manufacturing. Thank you.
Thank you, Sipho. Deshan?
Hi, Kanya. Thank you firstly for the opportunity. So my name is Deshan Naidu. I'm an entrepreneur. In this capacity, I represent our manufacturing entities. So in my capacity as CEO of Microfinish and Microcost. Microfinish is an automotive component manufacturing facility. 99% of our products are exported to developed markets, specifically Europe and the US. I also have a foundry called Microcost, where we actually manufacture the raw material that is used in the production process. So there's a gravity sand casting process used in the manufacturing of the raw material, and then precision engineering for the automotive components.
Wonderful. Thank you, Deshan. And then finally, Patukono.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patukono Notata. I'm an entrepreneur, but I own a company called Birthmark. At Birthmark, we design, develop, manufacture, service, and maintain buses on behalf of local and international OEMs using local labor, material, and funding. I am funded by IDC, and we've walked a big journey with IDC in terms of that. We technically produce about 80% of the buses in the BRT market in South Africa, and probably 40% in the commuter bus space. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So before we jump into some questions for our panelists this morning, I thought it would be helpful to just give a little bit of a background on why we're here today. So we all know that the manufacturing sector has long been upheld as one of the darling sectors, both for economic growth as well as job creation. And in the last quarter, ending March 2021, the sector saw a 4.6 year-on-year increase in output, driven predominantly by the food and beverage, as well as the motor vehicle subsectors. When we consider this, we also look at the role of technology in the sector, and it cannot be overestimated how important it is. Whilst the sector does create a lot of jobs, it is also where there are high marginal gains from the adoption of technology. Some identifying buzzwords would be smart manufacturing, Industry 4.0, automation and the application of machine learning in the production processes. So in a world that has been disrupted by a global pandemic requiring physical distancing, the role of technology has been elevated. Finally, we then, of course, have to think about how businesses are funded in the sector and how potentially this should change. The role of a funder, a strategic funding partner, has become even more important. Take the draft of the Green Paper on the advancement of new energy vehicles in South Africa, which was just released by the Minister of Trade and Development. How will funders change their assessment and due diligence processes to adequately work with and fund businesses in the future? So here we are this morning, looking at our panel where we touch on the convergence of manufacturing, technology, and funding, what we build in the future, and how resilient the manufacturing sector will be. So to start us off, I'll start with Sipho from Masisizane Fund. Sipho, why is the manufacturing sector a priority for Old Mutual and the Masisizane Fund? And how do you view SMEs in this sector?
Thanks, Kanye, for the question. Manufacturing is important for us as a fund because of its employment creation potential and also its contribution to GDP. Not only is the sector important for Old Mutual, it's also important for the country as a whole. Which is also evident in the government's documents like the NDP of 2030. I mean, the sector alone contributes about 40% to GDP and makes up about 11% of total employment creation in the country. When it comes to the role of SMEs in the sector, we see them as a catalyst for employment creation and the ultimate contribution to GDP of the country.
Thank you, Sipho. So on that point then, I'd like to bring Mark in. Mark, the IDC is one of the largest providers of funding in the manufacturing sector in South Africa. How have you and how will you partner with your portfolio companies to be resilient throughout COVID, considering the points that Sipho just brought in around the importance of the sector in the economy?
Thanks, Kanya. We've put a lot of emphasis on engaging with our existing portfolio partners to understand the needs, because obviously COVID has impacted people differently and so we've done a few things. One, we've categorized clients who needed short-term support, and by short-term support I mean through deferment of the existing loan facilities to generate breathing space for them to focus on operations and riding the wave, so to speak. We've additional client buckets which needed new support in additional loan funding to carry them through the COVID period. And we've availed of COVID distressed funding to that. And the benefit of COVID distressed funding being that it's at reasonably preferential interest rates. And we've allocated different principles that we would look at to facilitate that funding, acknowledging that people would need the breathing room during the short to medium term before they would be in a position to continue repaying those loans or repaying the new loans. And then there's a third bucket, which are the companies which have benefited through the COVID process, who needed expansionary funding and support. Because even during these times, there's been opportunity. And we've tried to look at this holistically and support in the method and methodology that is required for each company. Our founding principle was that manufacturing needs to continue post-COVID. Nobody plans efficiently and effectively for these black swan events. And hence we had to support governance initiatives around this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. You've brought in an interesting point around the fact that there have been opportunities in COVID as well. Bongio, I'd like to bring you in here from an accelerator perspective and the role that you play. Specifically looking at right now, the world that we're living in, what role do you think that business accelerators play in ensuring the longevity and how businesses are able to pivot in different situations?
Certainly, Kanya, it's been interesting times, and like Mark has already alluded, there's been opportunity. I always tell young people, if you look at the youth unemployment in South Africa, it's really dire, and so we do need manufacturing sector to keep creating jobs. However, others are then forced into entrepreneurship purely because there aren't jobs that could absorb them. And so the benefit of starting or being an SME within the manufacturing sector now and joining an accelerator is that, one, you can be born digital. As you've alluded, there are smart technologies. You can actually already incorporate technology at the beginning of your SMME journey. And I think the real benefit of being part of an accelerator, if I were to speak particularly in the manufacturing sector, it allows you to continue with your trade without really fussing about the accounting, the tax, and the compliance elements of your business, because you've got a dedicated business advisor that will walk you through this journey. Accelerator, by definition, is to help an organization grow and help the entrepreneur grow, both in their mindset and in the way they run their business. So I think with the manufacturing sector, you have to be really conscious of costs. And sometimes entrepreneurs may not know what indicators, financial indicators to look out for if they're not within an environment of an accelerator, to help them point in the right direction on how to pivot, in fact, and where the opportunities lie. So it's just having that extra layer of support.
I want to come back to the role of business accelerators in a moment, but there's a point that you've mentioned around technology that I'd like to bring Deshan in on. So Deshan, for Microfinish, the operational objective is to be a world-class lean manufacturing outfit. Can you talk to us about the role that technology has played in your business and perhaps any misconceptions that you've experienced when you talk about a lean business?
Thanks, Kanya. So I think just to go back and for the purpose of the audience, just to give some context. So Microfinish is a business that's been around for around 36 years. We purchased the assets out of liquidation, and essentially from that process, it was practically a startup business. We had a lot of legacy issues to deal with in relation to outdated processes and operations. And from that perspective, our vision statement to be a world-class lean manufacturing outfit was born. I think the definition of lean has evolved significantly, over the last few years, and specifically through this COVID period. Historically, lean was a concept that was applied in the manufacturing industry, talking about lean processes from a production point of view. I think that thought process has now evolved to lean thinking, which is truly applicable to any business and any environment. And that's a fundamental change in the application of the thought process behind lean. And what we're talking about there is essentially having the startup mentality, having an entrepreneurial mentality towards any problem that you're faced with, whether it be on the production floor or on the operational side in terms of administrative systems. And from that perspective, it is important to have this constant sort of insatiable desire to innovate and pivot and diversify. And through that process, I think technology has played a very pivotal role in our organization from day one. When we started operations under this new management structure, we were on average 130% more expensive than our closest competition in India and China. And as I mentioned, 99% of our business is export orientated. So we're perpetually having this conversation in terms of price competitiveness with international sort of competition and our international customers. So through that process, it was really important for us to reinvest into the plant, implement single process technology, look at various IT systems as well as cloud-based infrastructure. And I think this process has been accelerated in our organization over the last 12 months, where we've adopted during specifically the hard lockdown, an approach of complete remote working, using digital technologies like we're currently recording this panel discussion on, and embracing cloud-based sort of technologies. I think that's very important. And I would encourage entrepreneurs or people that are looking to start up businesses in the space to not only reach out to accelerators, but also improve knowledge in relation to the lean startup. So Eric Ries writes a good book called The Lean Startup in the space, and it talks about the mentality and the approach of dealing with problems and how to navigate black swan events that we're currently in.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dishan. Looking at the importance for localization, and Mark, I'd like to bring you in just a moment, but I'll start with Patukolo. Considering Birthmark and the fact that you design, manufacture, and service buses locally, using local funding, local labor, local material, can you talk to us about the challenges of operating in the sector in this manner, where there's a call from government to localize and you've responded in this way? Talk to us about some of the opportunities and challenges and how you've overcome these in your business.
Look, thank you for that. I'd say that I've benefited a lot in terms of the local content legislation because it allowed me to compete with international players in a different space. And I'm saying that, that local material and funding has helped. But one of the weakest problem is with the challenges is with the procurement guys within the municipalities, within the government. They still don't understand that when they buy an imported product, they're actually externalizing cash and they're actually externalizing jobs that could be created. We employ people's uncles in this country, but they would prefer to send those jobs into Europe and other places when they are buying an imported product. It's about the understanding of a key move in terms of where the money actually ultimately ends. So for me, it's about job creation. It's about growing country. It's about sharing with other people to make sure that they can add value on their daily lives. So local content is to make sure that we can be able to grow our economy better. And I'm saying that that's one of my biggest contribution into the industry. And I think it's something that I would want to steer. For the government side, it's more on the monitoring side. DTI is supposed to monitor the local content, and we've seen fake certificate being issued to certain people and all of that. But there's nothing that is being done with those certificates being issued. So monitoring is something that the government needs to strengthen so that it can actually improve this sector. In our company, we actually audit our suppliers to the raw material base, where they source their raw material, where they source the people, so that we can make sure that when we say we provide a locally based product, we know where the source is up to a raw material. Thank you.
I'll pause here and make a public service announcement that even though the session is being recorded, on Tuesday, the 25th of May, our panelists will be available to answer any questions. So do please post any questions that you may have in the chat for us. Moving ahead then to Mark, and I just want to double click on this localization point. So the Ministry of Trade and Industry seeks to localize up to 200 billion of additional production over a 5-year period. What role do you think funders and businesses play, or rather need to play, in order to realize this? And if you could speak specifically from an IDC perspective, what you see that looking like.
Thanks, Kanya. You are correct. There's been a policy shift, and that policy shift is looking at localization in various aspects of our economy. And the way this is being driven is through the implementation of master plans for industry sectors. The IDC is keenly involved in effectively all master plans currently on the table, and they stretch from the automotive sector all the way through to poultry, forestry, and clothing and textiles. And the key focus there is to bring all stakeholders together for a common purpose. And that purpose is localization and job creation, internalizing the wealth of the country. The way the IDC has been actively involved is not only in developing, co-developing the master plans, but also in looking at opportunities and how we can make funding available for either new entrants to take advantage of those opportunities or existing players in the market expanding to meet those objectives. There are clear indications that there are market gaps in the value chains for local supply. And I'm sure my colleagues around the table will echo that. But our role is to try and facilitate the closing of those market gaps, because industrialization is still our key focus as the IDC. And we will partner with industry players or new entrants with keen ideas on how we can facilitate the closing of those market gaps to meet the overall objectives, which is eventually job creation. As Patukolo has said, that is a key objective not only of businesses, or should be a key objective of businesses, but all stakeholders. A key driver of that is demand. And the master plans look at deriving that through stakeholder engagement. If I use the clothing and textile sector, retailers have come on board and indicated that they will move local supply, local spend from a level of 40% to 60 to 70% over a 10-year period. And that translates into significant amount of jobs being created in the local market. And every master plan has a similar ilk to it, where it's demand-driven. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I like the use of the word master plan. And Sipho, I assume Masisizane Fund also has a master plan when it comes to the manufacturing sector. Can you talk to us about what you think some of the priorities are in the sector and how you see Masisizane Fund playing a role in the space?
Thanks, Kanye, for that. In our view, I think the priorities in the sector are economies of scale and the ability to produce or manufacture products way cheaper than what the competitors can do. The beauty about economies of scale and also being able to produce cheaper is that you can wage a price war against your competitors and also lead to gaining more market share. So I think the main is economies of scale and also the ability to produce products cheaper than your competitors, and also what the Japanese refer to as Kaizen, which basically means continuous improvement of your products and services. Thank you.
Sipho, I'm going to push you a little bit on that question to speak specifically from a Masisizane perspective. I mentioned the term strategic funder. What role specifically would you play in partnering with businesses in the sector?
Okay, so we as a fund have got a strong post-investment team, which basically is in charge of monitoring and evaluation of the funded clients. So when a client comes in funding and then they get funded, and then we come in as post-investment. So what basically happens there is we try and work the journey with the client to ensure that they maximize their production facility. And also in cases where we see that there are also inefficiencies, and then come up with ways to address those gaps in manufacturing.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Sipho. You mentioned some interesting terms, Kaizen and the like. I'd like to bring Deshan in here. As a business that manufactures for a global market, what are the key lessons that you can share in terms of growing and maintaining your space in external markets?
Thanks, Kanya. I think it's a good question. So, and to be honest, it's not rocket science. It's essentially just being at the front and the cutting edge of your game. And I think the conversation here is a bit disjointed, because we're talking about SMMEs on one side and then global markets on the other side. So I think in terms of trying to answer the question to bridge the gap, I think I'll give a little bit of context to what we do at Microfinch and then talk a little bit of from an SME perspective, if you don't mind indulging me there. So from a Microfinch point of view, as I mentioned, we started off on the back foot already. It's essentially trying to sell products at twice the price of what people are currently purchasing them for. And through that process of continuous improvement and innovation, Sipho mentioned Kaizen. But it's more than that. It's about continuous improvement and rapid experimentation, if I can call it that. to try and ensure that you're innovating your product and meeting your customer demand, and giving that customer satisfaction, whether it be from a quality of product, customer service, or communication. Those aspects are very important. So I think, for us, if I can summarize it, it will probably come down to trust, communication, and superior quality products as the main factors that are important to maintain international customer base. When we look at ourselves as South Africa relative to other large manufacturing countries in the East, there really isn't much of a difference. And this, with regard to what, if I can call, institutionalized sort of or installed capacity, right? Scale is one consideration, and as a result of there being larger installed capacity in these countries, it really does decrease the price point. The competitive advantage that we have as a South African business, and I think this is applicable to anyone that is in the export realm, is the fact that we conduct business in an environment that is very similar to the European culture of doing business. I think that's important. We're on a very similar time zone, and we're able to come up with innovation and quick wins quite easily. So those are the unique selling points that when we are pitching microfinance as a business, we try and focus on. And that has resulted in significant success, specifically over the last 12 months, where we had this COVID-19 global pandemic, and people were running around trying to basically save their livelihood. So I think it's important to ensure that you have a very trustful relationship, not only with your customers, but also your stakeholders. And that really does help to assist sort of treacherous times like we currently find ourselves in. Then I think, Kanya, just quickly from an SME point of view, when we're looking at key lessons of growing and maintaining market, a lot of the points that I mentioned are applicable to an SME environment as well. When we look at trying to get local business, as I mentioned, 99% of our business is export orientated. We face the same challenges as my fellow panelists in terms of trying to push localization. And yes, there are these master plans in place, but essentially they are plans, and it's about the implementation of their plans where more focus should be implemented, or more focus should be attended to. And as an SME, when you're walking into the door, you have no reputation from the outset, and in the first 10 minutes, you have to build credibility. I faced this in my personal capacity as an entrepreneur. When I started my various businesses, I spent the first 10 to 15 minutes of every conversation explaining to senior executives why I'm sitting in the room. Now, that's a serious challenge for an SME or a young entrepreneur coming into the space. In order to mitigate that, it's important to have a level of professionalism so people understand that you know what you're talking about. And I think that's where business accelerators as well as DFIs become very important in terms of framing that conversation for the SME. Ensure that the soft things like your marketing material, as well as your business proposition and whatever it is in terms of your go-to-market strategy has been formulated and articulated and ready for an audience that is in the private sector or commercial audience.
Thank you, Deshan. It's like you read my mind, because I was going to go to Bongiwe and talk about the role that Transire plays, but specifically, but also in general from a business accelerator. So Sipho has brought in the importance of the role of post-investment and, to use his words, walking the journey with the client. Deshan has brought in the point around, there's a gap that needs to be bridged. Can you talk to us about the specific role that Transire plays in bridging this gap and walking the journey with growing businesses? And also, if you can bring in the element of, so I have a fantastic business, how do I access markets? How do I speak to funders? Can you talk to us about the role that the accelerator would play in this instance?
Sure, no problem, Kanya. I think all of the panelists have kind of highlighted the gaps that exist in the manufacturing sector from a very practical perspective. But there's another gap that I want to zone in on that I think will answer your question, Kanya, being the funding gap within the sector. bridging that financing gap. So I get very excited when the IDC and Masisizane Fund speak around supporting entrepreneurs within this sector, because we really need a collaboration between DFIs as well as business accelerators to really set SMMEs up for success. And I like what Deshan said about trust. And so in my role in Transaya as the chief executive, it really gives me pride and joy when an entrepreneur has that trust with their funder as well. So not only do you need trust with your suppliers and your day-to-day, but when that funding opportunity comes, you've also got to be prepared. And Deshan highlighted around the issue of credibility. And sometimes your documents actually speak for you. Your preparedness is also linked with how prepared are you in terms of compliance, in terms of tax, in terms of finances. Are your annual financial statements in order? Is your tax compliant? Are your documents in order with SARS? In terms of CIPC, is that in order? Is that in check? So that before you even speak to the executives in that room, your business is kind of a credible, vetted entity that's allowed to kind of operate in the sector. So the accelerator helps you with that. Then on the other point, particularly in Transaya, we've got Growth Wheel certified business advisors that walk the journey with the entrepreneur. And we tackle absolutely every aspect, being marketing, how you pitch. We allow the entrepreneur to kind of climatize to that environment, especially if you're an SMME or you're a young entrepreneur that's never necessarily been in a boardroom where you need to pitch your business for funding. Another thing we do is educate, we mentor, and we coach. In the space of SMME education, you really also need to have a mind shift. I think I mentioned earlier that a lot of people that I see that start businesses are starting businesses because of unemployment, not necessarily because they've got the traits of an entrepreneur. So being in an accelerator then gives you those kind of opportunities. So I'd encourage development finance institutions to partner, like Masisizane has done with SM Tax Transaya, to partner with organizations that are digital accountants that will help manufacturing businesses or businesses in any sector for that matter, bridge the financing gap, because funders will tell you the reason we don't fund SMMEs is because of credibility, it's because of trust, it's because when you're trying to fund them, you'll find that somebody's still manually operating with their financials, and you need something that's actually more, one, technologically driven, and two, in check with compliance with our existing statutory boards, things like CIPC and SARS.
Thank you, Bongiwe. The point that you mentioned around setting yourself up for success, I think is an important one, because it speaks to, I'll call it an ecosystem of supporters. One of them is ensuring that the economic climate allows the business to operate effectively. Second is the legislative framework that undergirds the operations of the business. And then the third one is the one that you just mentioned now around financial resources. Patutolo, can you talk to us from a Birthmark perspective? Do you think the South African ecosystem, if I can call it that, adequately supports manufacturing companies? And what do you think are some of the things that are working well? And what do you think are some of the things that need to be improved?
We are fortunate as a South Africa for manufacturing on two fronts. Is the fact that the access to raw materials is closer to us, so we've got minerals from iron ore, from anything that you would think of that is used. We've got in the sand and then the glass manufacturing, which is there. And one of the few advantages that we have than any other country is the fact that in the 90s, we were ahead of China in terms of manufacturing. We were ahead of South Korea in terms of manufacturing. And basically because of the engineering skills, the access to raw materials, and all of that. And all what we needed to do was to sustain and maintain that over a period of time. But one of the things that is kind of weak in terms of development is then the advanced manufacturing, where then there are new skills in manufacturing that are coming in, where then there's additive products that are coming in, there's AI in terms of that, there's smart factories that are coming in, which kind of replace the functionality that has been driven by most people. And you have to change with technology when it comes to those things. If you don't adapt, you would be left behind. So it's really good to say that, you need to be able to keep up the game and in terms of that. One of the things that I have allowed my business to be able to do that is the fact that I manufacture based on international standards. So when I design a bus, I design a bus that can be able to run and manage and operate in Europe with the European standards. So for instance, we've already done an electric bus, we've already done a hydrogen fuel cell bus, we've done hybrid buses, which are kind of an advanced part. But the only thing that is absent in South Africa is currently the charging infrastructure to be able to match that. But when that comes in, we'll just be able to deliver the right product to the market. So it's that, the adoption of the new policy in terms of the green vehicles is one of the things that is going to allow us to be able to enter the market. The incentives that will come in there will also help in terms of what needs to be done to make sure that we can be able to manufacture more vehicles for the country. Everyone is looking at to say that, they want to produce zero emissions vehicles, and we say that you need to be able to adapt. What is really missing, and it's at a lower level, I would say that unfortunately my kids goes into private school. In the private schools, they start STEM or the engineering studies at preschool. At the government school, that does not happen. So STEM and engineering field needs to be started at an early age, because when kids are allowed to be able to adapt to engineering skills early, they'll be able to practice them later in life. So that needs to be able to adapt at the government school, and we'll see a huge improvement in terms of that. And then the other part which is lacking is exposure to market. I know that South Korea and China, to be able to develop the advanced market, they sent 1,000 kids to Silicon Valley every year, simply because they wanted to expose them to the new trends and all of that. Out of the 1,000, 10 or 20% will come back or will go back to their respective countries and will be successful in what they're implementing. Even if the others disappear, it doesn't mean that there's nothing that is gained by the country, but that 10 and 20% is significant in terms of that. So we need to expose our youth into those kind of places, so that they can be able to adapt and see what is being done in other countries. Then we'll find ourselves, we'll be competing with first world. Everyone in terms of the market is looking at Africa. They said Africa is the future in terms of demand, because it's not industrialized, there's no infrastructure, and we are positioned best to be able to deliver that strategy for the whole world. And I'm saying that everyone who wants to go into Africa starts and lands in South Africa, and we need to embrace that. Thank you.
That's an excellent answer. Thank you so much, Patukolo. One of the things that comes to mind is, redesigning, in terms of redesigning the landscape, is we often think about the competition for funding from the business perspective. So there are many manufacturing entities competing for Masisizane funding, competing for IDC funding. If we just flip that on its head, both to Mark and Sipho, what are some of the things that you think from a funder perspective will need to change to be able to address the changing environment? So as businesses become more technologically astute, what are some of the skills that will become important in the investment teams? As businesses become more global, if I can use that word, what are some of the things that will need to be considered as part of the due diligence and assessment process? So within the teams that assess these businesses, can you talk to us about what the competition between funders for these new age businesses, if I can call them that, will be? Let me start with Mark, and then Sipho, same question to you, please.
Thanks. I think where the IDC has an advantage over other funders, and I speak quite generally in terms of commercial as well, banking facilities, is that we've always based our funding on very clear principles of due diligence and expertise. Our due diligence, as Dr. Colum might know, is quite an intensive thing. It's not a 2-day exercise. We should make sure we allocate the correct skill set within our organization. We've got experts in every area. And as the landscape changes, we improve that skill set. And 4IR is a good example, where we've brought on board a few experts in that space to understand what that actually means. And that learning then is disseminated amongst the due diligence team so that when they go out, they can have meaningful conversations with entrepreneurs and business owners about what it means when you want to put a new brand of technology in there. What is the benefit of having that new brand of technology? It is clear that for South Africa to improve in a manufacturing environment, we are going to need to be progressive. There's a lot of talk about jobless growth because of automation and the way the world is moving, robotics in automotive, etc. But that is almost a short-term step, because you still need labor. You just need different skilled labor. Eventually that comes into the market. And to your point, engineering becomes more important. Computer skills, technical skills become more important. When we evaluate businesses now, what we look for is, if you're going to be implementing new technologies, how is that technology going to be supported within your business? Do you run an outsourced model where you have people on call to support that technology? Because if you're basing your business model on new technology, I must be convinced that that technology is going to work for you and be in a condition to work for you. And I think a lot of businesses take that on board. I think to Dishan's point earlier, SMMEs, we almost need to view differently because the resource levels are different. They don't have access to the same resources to employ people at the highly skilled levels in every avenue. And I think as DFIs, we need to acknowledge that and accept that. The IDC runs a business support unit where we identify gaps, if at that due diligence stage, there are certain gaps that are identified within a business. And Bongiwe, that might speak to financial, it might speak to technical, marketing skills. There is some funding available that allows us to support that entrepreneur, and especially at an SMME level, to get those skills into the business, either on a consulting basis that then develops into a more permanent opportunity, because that really restricts the SMME base. Bongiwe's point is 100% correct. Financial integrity is a pillar at which any funding organization makes decisions on. And if that is not there as a starting point, we cannot look at it. It's impossible. And that is key to develop that sector, in my view. And I think as IDC, we've spent a significant amount of money over the last few years trying to invest in that space, but maybe wrongly so, through the wrong partnerships. Bongiwe, I'm taking your comment on board in terms of partnerships, because it is an important element. And I think the opportunities are there at the moment. There are many market gaps to be filled. And both SMMEs and larger organizations within South Africa are ideally poised. But I think the strategic intent and that professional application to a funding institution makes so much of a difference. I think Bongiwe hit the nail on the head. If you come to me with 2 sheets of paper, I generally accept that you haven't really thought through this process. So in a long-winded way, I've said that internally IDC has a skill set which evolves as the requirements evolve from our client base or potential client base. And what we're really working towards is trying to assist those budding entrepreneurs with the requisite support to ensure that they can be brought to fruition. Thank you.
Thanks, Kanya. I think Mark has stolen most of the words from my mouth. But maybe just to add, one of the greatest lessons that we've learned as a fund from COVID is that we never imagined that at some point we'll be able to do things like DDs remotely, present papers remotely, and disperse remotely. So I think as a fund now we're better positioned to serve our SMEs better using ICT as the main driver. For the longest time, I think for the first 4 or 5 years, we've been doing things very manual. So we've learned some great lessons from COVID in terms of implementing ICT. And also to Mark's point, there's always this narrative that says that technology leads to job losses, which is something that's very common in South Africa, especially driven by the unions. But people tend to forget that when you implement technology, there's also opportunities of employment in the design of the machines, in the maintenance of the machines, and also in the production of those machines. So it just needs one to change their mindset and look into the opportunities where one can look into the maintenance and the production of those machines. So our view is that technology and ICT in general have a great role to play in manufacturing, in the sense that it can lead to higher production and decrease costs. So that's our view as a fund. And also in the future, we foresee a situation where in facilities there'll be linear production systems where we'll see lesser human contact and lesser people involved in production, but more having AutoCAD machines and robotics in the main to drive production. Thank you.
Thank you, Sipho. I think we're going to start drawing to a close now. But before I ask the final round, just to Patukola and to Deshan, same question to both of you, is the theme around job creation, around the perception of technology has come out quite strongly in our conversation. I work for an organization that is, embedded in technology and how we're able to reach and communicate with our customers. From your perspective in a manufacturing entity, what has been the biggest mind shift in terms of changing operations in the business that have been caused by COVID? So across the operating entity, from a strategic perspective, what have you seen over the last 12 months as the biggest mind shift that you as leaders in your business have had to take, and therefore how you've had to implement that throughout the business? Let me start with you, Patukola, and then I'll come to Deshan. Same question.
Thank you for that. One of the difficulties during COVID was how to social distance people in the factory. We employ 1,400 people, so we had to change from a normal shift to create 3 shifts, in terms of shifts. So we'd have a shift that will take us 6 a.m. and then until about 1 p.m. And then that shift, there's another one that started exactly at 1 and finished later. But the challenges with that shift, it simply meant that now people needed some night shift allowances, something that was needed. You needed lighting, which was not necessarily because we're not operating at night. You needed to improve in terms of quality management, because now a bus that is painted at night would not necessarily be the same the bus that is painted during the day. So there were those additional costs that drivers that came into the business because of that. I had never used MS Teams or Zoom before March last year, and I had to start doing my meetings on Zoom, and I needed to start staying at home, And I'm saying that, it allowed me new things to do, to an extent that I feel more comfortable now on Zoom and MS Teams and doing meetings remotely and than getting there. I haven't traveled overseas to Germany, to Sweden, and all other places. I've been just creating and doing my meetings locally, or via Teams and all. When it comes to the actual staff, you probably understand to say that we have a lot of general workers, in our system. So people who have never touched computers before, who would only manually do their work and all of that, those people have become kind of redundant in terms of that. So we've started a program of actually teaching them how to use computers, end user computing as a first entry. We've started a cell phone masterclass. People use cell phones, but only 20% is used on those cell phones. So we're trying to get them there, because now instructions are no longer manually written in paper. They are coming in computers and iPads. So we need to make sure that they become knowledgeable in terms of that, so that we don't lose in more. We've established what we call Birthmark Manufacturing Academy, where when workers are no longer working on a shift, they are actually at a training center where they are actually being taught some new skills, and that we've done it in partnership with Mersita, and to say that we can accelerate skills force to make sure that people become better as we are getting into that. So we're building our own skill base so that we can be able to survive the future using technology. And I'm saying that, we also established what we call Birthmark intelligence systems within the business. And that we have been gathering data on harsh braking, driving, and various things in the past, but we have never automated and used to interpret that data before. But now we are interpreting that data for the benefit of improving our quality in terms of improving the performance of the vehicle at the client. Now we can remote start and stop a vehicle. We've designed a starter that can do that. So you'll see a bus lowering the drive when it drives around schools, simply because it's a safety issue. We've mapped out those. So in the Birthmark intelligence system, those are the things that we are doing to make sure that the client gets the best out of us. Thank you.
Thanks, Kanya. So I think if I understood the question correctly, there are two aspects to it. One was, how did we ensure business continuity during COVID, and what are the biggest challenges that we faced during that period? Is that correct? Okay, so I think I'd like to start by just underlining what my fellow panelist has said in terms of digital literacy. I think that's a very, very important consideration, and it's something that is not being spoken about enough in our country. Recent stats show that up to 80% of our population are not digitally literate, and that is really, really concerning. So we talk about this digital divide in terms of people who can actually use technology and have access to technology. And those considerations are very important when we talk about the future and navigating the climate that we're in. But similar to my colleague here, we did a similar thing. The first thing that went out was a survey in terms of digital literacy. Who has access to a smartphone? Just understanding and assessing the current level of skills in our organizations, and then implementing mitigating factors to address those concerns. So we have navigated, especially during the hard lockdown, to a completely remote working operation from an administrative point of view. And I think we had the benefit of, given that we are export orientated, and there was a sort of a lag in terms of the COVID wave, or the first wave to South Africa, we had already seen the impacts in terms of our customers overseas, and we had actively started the education before the initial national lockdown was announced. So that education and communication is really important. And this all sort of dovetails to what we like to call a learning organization and a learning culture in our organization. I think if you can address that mentality, irrespective of whether you have a lot of general workers or a lot of high-end executives, everyone has to go through this process of sort of unlearning and relearning. And that's what COVID has resulted in us all doing. I mean, the fact that we're all sitting here using digital technology, when we had to send out communication when people were at home as a result of the lockdown and we weren't able to manufacture, that was done via WhatsApp and various other forms of electronic communication. When we had to implement COVID screening and starting up production again, we used various sort of online forms to assess whether or not there's a high risk of the individual being in contact with someone else, and then implementing robotic process automation to generate alerts so that we are identified, if there's a potential risk in the plant. These are tools that seem complicated when I'm speaking about them, but they're actually really easy to implement. And what it requires is just taking the step of educating ourselves to understand what is out there and how do we actually implement these various technologies. So to come back to the question in terms of how we actually overcame the hard lockdown, and that was the biggest thing for us. There was sort of a halt in terms of global operations. We weren't allowed to manufacture, and we weren't allowed to sort of distribute our products. And the biggest challenge that we were faced with was cash flow. Cash flow is a material consideration when you're not allowed to operate a manufacturing facility. In my plant, I use the analogy that in manufacturing, a manufacturing plant does not operate at a low level. And yes, it can be done on a small scale, but when you're talking about large export volumes, it is like a Formula One car. It only works at high speeds and high output and high volume. So when you're faced with basically sort of a roadblock to production, you have all these sort of fixed costs that you have to deal with. And that's why I highlighted the concern and the importance of having this trusting ecosystem, both on the state of all your stakeholders as well as your employees. What we did was we went out on the floor. We said, guys, this is what is happening. This is what we think is going to be happening going forward. Whatever does happen, it's going to result in negative financial implications for our organization. And we just wanted to prepare everyone accordingly for that. So we are on the side of over-communication. To navigate the cash flow issues, we had really difficult conversations, but open conversations with all our stakeholders. And to be honest, we didn't get any support from our sort of funders at this point during the 2020 period. It was our customers that actually assisted us in terms of paying us earlier so that we could manage the cash conversion cycle. So I think that's an important consideration because there are sort of DFIs around the table. And whilst there's good work that is being done, there's also a lot of challenges and hurdles to access and to get that trigger point where money flows. And that time period where, hey, I'm an entrepreneur having a problem right now, and okay, we are ready to approve and disperse money is a big issue because a lot happens in that time period. So I think it's important as we talk about master plans and innovating the funding framework to consider the agility that is required in the current business environment and to try and minimize or optimize the lead time towards disbursement of funds. That becomes quite important. I think, again, just underlining the point of communication and being very sort of open in terms of making sure that everyone is in the loop as to the current challenges you're facing is very important. What we did at Microfinish was that we quickly approached this sort of lean startup mentality, and we actually innovated our product range. So we could not produce products that were used in the automotive industry. So we pivoted towards COVID-related products. We created and innovated a product called Sunny Step, which is basically a touchless way of opening doors. So it's a foot-operated door opener. And we did this with no capital requirement because we managed to use the raw material that we're currently using in our processes. We used the machine stock that we're using in our conventional processes. And we leveraged off our current customer base to supply this product into various corporates. And it was very successful. And the time period that we took was 3 weeks from initial prototype to having an online store, e-commerce, and full-scale manufacturing. So what it proves is that by having the right culture and organizational mindset, you can achieve exponential things. And that is the most important thing. People need to be educated to understand, to think, to learn how to think out the box. And face with challenges and innovate. And as South Africans dealing with the various challenges that we have in this country, I think we are very, very well positioned to be entrepreneurial in that manner and to think outside the box and come up with sort of lateral solutions. So again, I think to sort of summate my point here, when we're talking about business continuation, it's about being agile enough to respond to the challenges that you are presented with and ensure that you have this ecosystem or develop an ecosystem that is supportive of your business whilst ensuring that there's clear communication to all stakeholders involved.
Amazing. Thank you, Dishan. What I'll do now is just make one last public service announcement that the panelists are available, so please do post your questions online in the chat, and they will be available to respond to those whilst you watch this recording. So to close off our conversation this morning, same question to our ecosystem sitting around the table. And I'd like to start with Bongiwe. Considering the conversation that we've just had and the fact that we do have an ecosystem right now, we've got a funder on the table, we've got a funder representing government on the table, and we've got an accelerator as well as entrepreneurs. What do you see the manufacturing industry and your role in the future of manufacturing be post-COVID? So right now it's a little bit difficult to imagine a post-COVID world, but let's imagine it. What do you see your role in the manufacturing industry, specifically as a funder, as a business owner, and as an accelerator? Bongi, I'll start with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it's actually pertinent to start at the accelerator point, purely because that's the one space where the SME and the funder will then get to engage in a collaborative fashion. So in a post-COVID world, what I see an accelerator doing for the manufacturing sector is, one, bringing light to the innovations that an SME has, and also, like I mentioned earlier, bridging that financing gap in a very real-time fashion. I think Deshan has alluded to a cash flow issue that has kind of transpired in a post-COVID world, if you like, or during COVID, where a business in its operation, its day-to-day, suffers cash flow issues and is needing funding now, and the funder may not be ready from a time perspective to match that. However, in an accelerator world, if that SMME has a partner in a digital accountant, they may be able to do test and scenario testing to see how much can your cash flow sustain, and kind of indicate earlier on to try and trigger those conversations to help that entrepreneur, gain that financing. So an accelerator will assist the collaborative effect of having a funder and having an SMME have closer conversation. And I think what would support that is if the accelerator is also digitally accustomed. What I'm trying to say is that if your accounting is also cloud-based, if you're using cloud-based software like we do at SM Tax Transaya, it then does help because everybody has visibility and you can remotely manage your business accounting, you can remotely manage your business taxes. I think also accelerators in the future will play an education part. We've spoken about technology being at the center of this, and I think what's required in South Africa in particular is what we call reskilling. And skilling people to run organizations that are, one, digitally equipped to manage, or rather to use Sipo's points earlier around gaining efficiency of scale. You'll need to be digitized. And so if you're a born digital SME and you're not quite sure how to navigate the technology and let it work for you, accelerators are there to help you also test scenarios before going to market, and also teach you how to look out for tax incentives, to look out for what are your financials actually telling you. It's no good having an accountant that says, here's your annual financial statement submitted to the funder. No, you need to look at the liquidity ratios, the cash health of that business. There's certain indicators that can at least help bridge, that gap of financing where the funder is attuned earlier on to what the needs are of the SME, and the SME themselves is well equipped to know what to say and when, like Deshan has highlighted. The when is really, really critical, and I see accelerators working in that fashion.
Thank you, Bongiwe. I'll pose the same question to the funders at the table. Sipo and Mark, what do you see the role of funders being in the manufacturing industry in a post-COVID world? Sipo, I'll start with you.
Okay, maybe to start off, Kanya, I think post-COVID, we foresee facilities which will be more capital intensive than labor intensive. So this is where access to finance becomes very important in terms of funding these entrepreneurs to bridge the digital divide between being capital intensive and using manual labor. So our role basically is to move with speed, as Mr. Knight was saying earlier, to move with speed, to be very agile in the supporting of the SMEs to access finance in order to recapitalize and use technology efficiently for their production facilities.
Thanks. I think Sipho has covered a good point. Deshan's point is not lost. Agility for funders is important. The one thing DFIs in general have is a lack of agility. And it's something that I think the IDC is trying to build into its processes, because the opportunities that arise during the COVID period and post-COVID are not going to be there forever. And entrepreneurs are going to want to take advantage of those opportunities. International value chains have been impacted. There's in general a drive for localization outside of the master plans, and government's drive for it. So with those opportunities being on the table, we need to be, as funders, need to be in a position to act and support entrepreneurs much quicker, to bring them to fruition before they fade away. So it is definitely our challenge. I think, Sipho's point about capital intensity, yes, there's always going to be that element. Obviously, the IDC plays at a very high macro level where we're funding mines, and then at an SME level where we're funding a 3 million rand operation. And we can't treat all those applications with the same intensity. I think that's the learning point that the IDC is taking out of its own evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you. And then finally, to you, Deshan, same question. What do you see the role of both microfinish and businesses in general being in a post-COVID world in the context of the manufacturing sector?
Thanks, Kanya. I think this is a loaded question. It's a very difficult one to answer, because it's something that is, like we've been speaking about in terms of our buzzword here, being agile. It's an environment that is extremely dynamic. Things are changing all the time. But there are key takeaways that we can talk to and talk about. And I think it is around this sort of conversation about smart manufacturing, Industry 4.0, IoT, and the various other buzzwords that are out there. And with the truth of the matter is that everyone knows how to spell these things, but very few people are actually implementing it. And one needs to be very careful about exactly what we're talking about and where we as a country sit relative to where the rest of the world sits. And the truth of the matter is that the South African manufacturing industry is a lagging industry. If I look at the automotive industry, for example, no decisions in terms of innovative processes or alternate materials or manufacturing technologies are made in the country. Everything is done at a globalized or central procurement level, and then filters down via the tiered approach to South Africa. So from that perspective, it is important for us to look at what are the disruptive factors in the industry, and how do we as a country sort of tailor our approach to these advances in terms of technology in Industry 4.0, and what makes sense for us as a country. I think that's very important. Another important consideration, like we spoke about, is this digital divide and digital literacy. Industry 4.0, as we talk about it, is not really the implementation of new technology. It's about the convergence of technology to achieve greater insight. And as Bongiwe mentioned, data becomes a very important consideration here, whether it is data analytics in terms of production or insight in terms of what your financial management accounts are looking like. What are your liquidity ratios? What are your various sort of asset test ratios and solvency ratios, or your production efficiency? Those considerations are very important. And with the advent of technology, not in South Africa, by using cloud-based systems, it enables a lot of dashboards and analytics that can be derived and extrapolated from there. And the next important consideration is not only to have this data, but to actually use the data and to make informed decisions with the data that you're generating. I see the manufacturing industry undergoing disruption, and there's going to be a huge drive towards digital transformation. And digital transformation is, again, a loaded statement. There's a lot of characteristics that form or make part of digital transformation. But the important kind of consideration is that technology is one aspect of digital transformation. An important consideration for digital transformation is this employee culture that I'm talking about. If we can get the right mindset in the industry, we are then able to achieve superior results. So the focus on reskilling and unlearning and relearning is very important. Then you talk about digitalization of processes and operations to inform decision making. I think that's very important. We also look at this new buzzword that is being mentioned of co-opetition, which is essentially collaboration with your competition. And I think in an environment where everyone is under pressure from an investment point of view, we don't have money to reinvest in new technology, etc. And there might be issues in terms of accessing that funding. How do we then pool resources to meet customer demands in developed markets or on the local front? I think that's an important consideration, and that's something that we're seeing in terms of our internal ecosystem, where we are having a lot more collaborative discussions with our competitors in the country to unlock opportunities, for example, localization. So it's really is a difficult question to answer, but again, I'd like to underline and stress the importance of reskilling. I've gone through this process. All our staff at Microfinish and Microcast have gone through this process of understanding exactly what is digital transformation, what is the impact of new technology, and how does that affect us, not only at our workstation, but also from an organizational point of view. And this is not something that we can expect the general worker on the shop floor to do. This is something that happens at a strategic level. So leadership and strategy becomes really important in these conversations. And what we've done is that we've tried to decentralize that process. So instead of us making, executive decisions in terms of what the corporate strategy should look like, we have that at a lower level in the organizational sort of chart. And what you see is that through this process of implementing new technology, to talk to Mark's point in terms of jobless growth, when you go through the process of automating a specific process or a production process, what that entails is that there's a lot less human machine interface, right? So it's important for us to firstly address that. How do we ensure that the people that are at the coalface or at the fire essentially understand what this new technology is doing and can relate to that technology? That's very important. The second is that by automating the process, it then frees up a lot of time for these individuals. And like my colleague at Birthmark mentioned, if we can channel that time into a learning format where people are learning or innovating or collaborating to solve other business problems, it helps you to future-proof your business essentially. So again, I think that learning and reskilling is very important, and that is something that needs to be targeted from an executive level and decentralized to the shop floor in order to navigate the disruption that is coming. I hope that answers your question.
It does, yes. Thank you very much. So this has been a conversation about redesigning the landscape, exploring post-pandemic opportunities for manufacturing. And I think we've managed to touch on the convergence or the nexus that I started off by talking about, which was in a world where we know that manufacturing and industry is one that is meant to drive growth, we need to consider the role of technology. I think we've spoken quite a lot about what that looks like and how it plays out, both from a business perspective, but also from a funding perspective. We've also spoken about the role of funders and what some of the things that need to change are when we consider this ecosystem of players. What's coming through quite strongly as we close the conversation is the role of co-opetition and partnerships. So partnerships are about what is a situation where we both win. And this becomes particularly important when we consider the fact that there are non-traditional competitors who are waiting to encroach within this space. The role of technology, the role of funders, and the role of business, supported by an ecosystem which is created by government and legislation, is incredibly important. And so with this conversation, I do hope that you've enjoyed it this morning with us. I'd like to close off by thanking my panelists, Disha Naidu, the Chief Executive Officer of Microfinish, Patutolo Nodada, the Chief Executive Officer of Birthmark, Bongiwe Bejanziko, the Chief Executive at Startup Services and Transaya Business Accelerator, which is part of SM Tax Digital Accounting, Sipho Ngai, the Business Development Manager at Masisizane Fund, and Mark Goliath, the Head of Textiles and Wood Products at the IDC. Thank you very much.
morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to our esteemed panelists for the insights, which is a perfect entry point for our discussion. I have themed our discussion, The Future Reimagined. We'll be going down a very short memory lane, less than 500 days, starting with the global impact of the pandemic on the manufacturing sector, bringing it closer to home and unpacking COVID on the sector locally. We'll then unpack the key emerging trends in the sector post-COVID, shining a spotlight on the role of FDIs in aiding the sector's recovery, and more importantly, Masisizane's role. Then we'll close with how, as Masisizane, we have and continue to assist businesses in this sector. This is an infographics drawn from Interact Analysis, who do amazing work on the global manufacturing industry output on a regular basis. According to their FEB report, the global industrial production lost close to 1.6 trillion of value due to the pandemic. Global manufacturing production equally declined by 6% in 2020. If you look at the chart just on the top left, you look at the global manufacturing contracting by 3.9% in 2020. What is encouraging, though, that we expect the sector to recover and grow by 6% in 2020. Concerning is the automotive production, which decreased by 14.6% in 2020 and unlikely to recover until 2023. What is more concerning, primarily for our own environment, is the supply and the application of vaccine. By our own account, we have fared and continue to fare quite poorly in this space, and hopefully we'll recover the rollout, which will then also help to stimulate economic activity. At the height of the lockdown, the industry, through the construction subsector, was ranked the second most affected sector, which was at 89%. The slide re-emphasizes the point Bonge made regarding the role of Business Accelerator in supporting small businesses during these Black Swan events. Liquidity and cash flow management was one of the challenges most small businesses were faced with during this period. Hence, most reported cash flow runways between 1 to 2 months, 3 months at most. Again, to Bonge's point, many lack the in-house skills and business advisory services required to pivot businesses successfully and timelessly. And it is for this reason then that the Business Accelerator came to being. And we'll touch on it, its offering, and how it seeks to assist businesses in this sector going forward, and any other sector for that matter. Zooming in close to the sector at home, despite a strong showing in the fourth quarter, mainly boosted by production of food and beverages, motor vehicle parts, accessories, and other transport equipment, the sector was down for the year by 11.6%. Main contributors, besides the work stoppages, were the falling demand for steel and supply chain disruptions. And we'll touch on supply chain disruptions when looking at the sector going forward. Fast forward to February 2021, the sector extended an almost 21 months decline in production. The delays in the rollout of vaccine had added more salt to our structural constraint wounds that as a country we've been battling with. You're looking at the challenges with our energy situation, or the overall lack of investment. During this period, the country lost 600 jobs, and shy of 200 of these jobs were in the sector. Overall, the sector has declined from 26% of contribution to GDP in 1994 to less than 13% currently. Granted, our economy has tripled over this period, but in absolute terms, other sectors have also increased. Despite these challenges, the sector has and stands to play a significant role in the recovery process of our economy broadly. The sector has a multiplier effect in the economy, contributing over 12% of GDP and employing more than 1.2 million people. A strong manufacturing industry can also help mitigating against the supply chain disruptions, making local businesses more resilient. Speaking of supply chain disruptions, at the height of the pandemic, it is reported that Apple had to limit the sale of its iPhone to 2 per person because of parts shortages in Asia. This then created an opportunity to develop regional supply chain sources, also accelerate development of lower-risk suppliers to supply critical parts. This also assists in fostering regional integration. It is well documented that regional integration that is well fostered, it deposits at least 1% into our GDP growth. This also ensures then that there will be reduction in cost, better margins and efficiencies, largely because now there will be closer proximities both to customers and to suppliers. The panel and Kanya have spoken broadly around digital transformation. Not only has the pandemic changed the norms for remote workforce, but it has also accelerated the shift to digital manufacturing. Technologies like 3D printing can now be pursued more aggressively now that additional uses have emerged. 3D printing can now be repurposed for life-saving medical purposes. There are discussions on how 3D printing can now be used in making ventilators and so on. Businesses that have built their e-commerce capabilities timelessly are already capitalizing on the accelerated shift towards online shopping. And in our own economy, we're looking at businesses like Dropper and Zuzli who've benefited greatly as a result of the shift to online shopping. And businesses that have not done so, this then presents a great opportunity to bypass the distribution to distributors and the middlemen and have direct access to customers, which also help businesses and manufacturers to control the customer service journey. Despite the slow adoption of these technologies within manufacturing, African manufacturing industry, it is however encouraging that we are moving in the right direction. To Sipo's point, AI, machine learning, and advanced analytics offer manufacturers the opportunity to improve efficiency and increase profit margins. Technology becomes even more important as complexities in the manufacturing space continue to increase. It is now said that data is the crude oil of the 21st century. But without the ability to analyze and action the insights coming out of the data now is just taking up space. It's also encouraging to note that manufacturers are now awakening to the realization that IoT empowers them to make informed strategic decisions by providing crucial and real-time information. Kanya mentioned smart manufacturing, and the benefits of smart manufacturing are very, very wide. And here we're looking at optimization of organizational systems, improved product quality, increased efficiencies in resource allocation, which ultimately improve customer satisfaction. And finally, new ways of work and employees. Deshaun makes the point that irrespective of the acceleration and advances in technology in the manufacturing space, particularly in the African manufacturing industry, it is employees who makes the decision and still get the job done. It is therefore important to use this opportunity to upskill and reskill employees in preparation for the world post-COVID. According to the Deloitte Manufacturing Survey, 61% of manufacturing CEOs are working on a hybrid model for production and non-production process. It was therefore encouraging to hear particularly that him and his team have already embarked on this journey. Key trends that are also emerging is how manufacturers are to collaborate effectively with competition to deliver value. And this also speaks to the point of cultivating strong ecosystems. With all that being said, what has been our role, or what is our role, and what continues to be our role as a fund, and how do we plan then on adapting as a fund with these key changes that we are seeing emerging? In addition to our traditional role as a DFI, whether is it reducing financial exclusion by deploying capital timelessly or mobilizing financial resources, it is important, ladies and gentlemen, and we do take the feedback that has come out of all the surveys post the COVID, that as much as there were COVID relief programs, one of the biggest challenges, one has been the criteria and the structure of those programs and the deployment of capital, that most DFIs and all the other players were quite slow in deploying capital accordingly. And this is a point then that we hit in augmenting our processes going forward. But we equally acknowledge that funding now needs to be channeled towards projects that takes advantage of the key trends that we've highlighted, whether it's to accelerate digital transformation, e-commerce acceleration, or supply chain localization to minimize the risk of future global disruptions. Because whether we like it or not, we will have another Black Swan event. A strong local manufacturing base, therefore, will go a long way in enhancing job creation, technological development, and innovation. To address the point raised by Kanya on the composition of the investment teams and the manner in which operational DDs are to be conducted going forward, I think it's fair to say that going forward, one should expect a hybrid model between virtual verifications and traditional face-to-face meetings, of course, where environment permits. However, for virtual verification to thrive, there's investment in data management, record digitization, and video conferencing that is required both on the SME side as well as on the side of the funders. Operationally, the composition of the technical DD teams requires upskilling now also to include machine learning expertise and robotics engineers, for example, as part of the team. Prior to COVID, Masisizane exposure has been through agribusiness. We're looking at both primary and agro-processing, and this is some of the partners we've partnered with during this journey. Supply chain looking at contract funding across sectors. From an exposure point of view, we've got exposure into manufacturing, we've got exposure into logistics within, and you name it. As long as there's a contract, there's an offtake agreement, and the strong and financial viability is sound. And finally, franchising, looking at retail service stations or all other franchising opportunities that are available to SMEs. They've got your restaurants, we sit down, we take away restaurants, and again, on the back of the partners that we have, the famous brands, the space, and this has been the fund's exposure to date. And during this period, then we as all the other players in the market, this has been our response to COVID, which we've broken down into three-pronged response. There was a short-term response where we provided immediate payment breaks to all our clients during this period. We restructured facilities accordingly and provided the necessary working capital funding. We also had a short to medium term on the back of the Old Mutual Insure COVID Relief Fund that we managed to date. We've approved and dispersed shy of 30 million, as made sure that we at least 730 and above businesses are retained and supported over 50 SMEs. Part of our solution has been grant funding and interest-free loans. From a long-term perspective, and this speaks to the point that Bongi mentioned, this is where then we launched our Business Accelerator in November 2020. Just to speak in detail about the Business Accelerator, the Business Accelerator is a partnership between SM Tax Digital Accounting and Tax Advisory Business and the Masisizane Fund. The accelerator seeks to address really the challenges of access to market, access to funding, challenges with business advisory, and then coaching, challenges with legal and compliance. So if one were to take an example, and which is a point that Bongi also mentions, that a well-structured documents bring credibility not only into the discussion, but also in making the funding requests progress further. But having said that, it is also true that in this space, we've got entrepreneurs that understands their businesses intimately, but they don't have the ability or the know-how to put together a business plan that can be given to a funder, which the funder can use to formulate a business case, an investment case that can be presented to any committees. It is for this reason then that SMTech's Business Accelerator seeks to assist businesses in putting together business plans that entrepreneurs can still own and be able to articulate quite well to any funder what their business does, the operation, the financial element, and what it seeks to do. Over and above that, the accelerator from the pre-investment support assists businesses with putting together feasibility studies as well as market research. It is often said, and Sipho made the point, that one of our key offerings is really to walk the journey with our investee companies. The key challenges facing business today, over and above access to finance, is access to markets. And as a business, as a fund, this is something that we really pay particular attention to on the back of the partnerships and networks that we've developed over the years. So where opportunities arise, we try by all means to make sure that we open those opportunities for access to markets. What is also born out of COVID is an opportunity for businesses to pivot accordingly. And this is what then our turnaround and scaling of plans that we do with Accelerator seeks to assist businesses to do. Over and above that, most entrepreneurs start as one and two-man businesses, but as the businesses grow, that human capital element becomes critical. And understanding that who do I bring on board to manage what function, what capability is required. And this is where then the accelerator also come in assisting businesses with their human capital strategies. Over and above that, and again, now that we in COVID and post-COVID area, that IT and digital element is going to be critical. And that's what then the accelerator offers. But with all the access to finance and access to market, if the compliance and legislative framework is not in place, the business is also then bound to fail. This is what then our mentorship program seeks to do, that to assist businesses with business coaching, businesses advisory, helping them with compliance as part of the startup services. SMTech's offering is underpinned by technology. It is for this reason then that as part of our SME training, we provide on-demand digital learning, master classes that are tailored for that particular problem that client might be facing. From an investment strategy and philosophy point of view, born by really the growth in population, urbanization, the fund then added two more sectors to our current offering, this being technology, media, and telecoms, as well as tourism. And technology, media, and telecoms really to assist businesses that are looking at expansion capital to take advantages of the future and opportunities that we have discussed. Pre-COVID, the acceleration and the adoption of technology was very slow. It is now said that as a result of COVID, the adoption of technology in Asia Pacific, for example, has accelerated by more than 10 years. Globally, it has accelerated on average by 7 years. It is also said that companies whose industry 4.0 implementation strategy was well structured have reported a strong ability to respond to the COVID crisis. It is primarily for that reason that our TMT sector focus is to assist businesses crystallizing and implementing their Industry 4.0 strategies, and also assist businesses in this space to grow. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I hope we have demonstrated our offering to date and how we seek to assist businesses, not only in the manufacturing space, which is really critical in ensuring and assisting government to address the key challenges that are facing the country: unemployment, poverty, and inequality. Thank you very much.
Distinguished guests, valued stakeholders, and members of the media, good morning to you all. The broad objective of Masizizane's interventions is to provide financial and non-financial support to help accelerate growth of SMMEs. This in turn enhances the role of SMMEs in driving economic growth, creating employment, and contributing to economic recovery, particularly given the challenges that have been brought on by the pandemic. You know, COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on South Africa's already fragile economy, with an outlook that is extremely challenging. To date, we have lost over 1 million jobs, and the unemployment rate is currently sitting at over 30%. And there are high expectations that real growth will come from the SMME sector. While we all accept and obviously expect that SMMEs will drive the greatest number of new jobs, there are still various challenges that affect SMMEs, with access to finance and technical support ranked amongst the top 10. Well, we can add digital transformation and technology to those particular gaps. As Masisizane, our goal is to bridge those gaps by providing appropriate lines of credit and mobilizing business development services, with manufacturing being one of those focus sectors. As we as Masisizane believe that these are critical enablers to SMME development and sustainability. Our line of credit targets SMMEs drawn from various productive sectors that include manufacturing, as we are talking about today, supply chain development, agribusiness, franchising, and most recently, tourism and technology sectors. We as Masisizane also pride ourselves in walking the journey to sustainability with our investee companies by having a dedicated team that provides post-investment support, monitoring, and facilitate capacity building interventions based on the gaps identified per enterprise supported. By sharing this information on opportunities that exist at Masisizane and other development players in the industry, we believe that we are in the right step, in the right direction to transforming the current landscape. Now, taking the marching orders from Masisizane's ethos of partnerships for a brighter tomorrow, we are of the view that a collaborative partnership approach between business, government, and other partners is needed for SMMEs to recover and grow beyond the harsh realities brought on by COVID-19. This is where partnerships like the Masisizane Fund and SMTech's Business Accelerator, as well as other development finance institutions, are positioned to make a difference. Now, together, we can achieve more and have greater impact in supporting the SMME sector. Now, having said all of that, I would like to express my gratitude to the panel speakers for sharing such rich content and insights. You know, quite often we hear development players and other businesses highlighting the vast opportunities that exist and that are available for small businesses. However, these programs are usually underutilized because local businesses are not aware of their existence. So today, the panel members, you are here to close that gap, and we thank you. I'd also like to thank you as business representatives and other guests in this webinar. We really appreciate you for taking time from your busy schedule to interact with us today towards a brighter tomorrow. And finally, yet importantly, a special thanks goes out to the manufacturing Indaba, Liz and your team, for making a success of today's event. Your professionalism in reaching today's milestone will forever be engraved in our hearts. We hope that we'll engage and work together more in the future. In conclusion, yes, the economic outlook looks bleak, but the outlook for SMMEs remains bright in terms of contributing to changes that are needed to transform the current landscape. SMMEs in manufacturing in particular have a great role to play because it is said that a thriving manufacturing sector is critical in driving sustainable, job-rich growth, as it is the top 3 multiplier sectors in terms of job creation, value addition, export earnings, and revenue generation for every rand that is invested. As Masisizane, we want to see your businesses thrive. And that journey starts with you reaching out to us, Old Mutual Masisizane Fund, for a fruitful business partnership. We're here to say to you today that Masisizane is open for business, and we look forward to partnering with you in your entrepreneurial journey and help you achieve a greater and brighter future for all. I thank you.